I try and look about 12 months ahead. I look at the problems that we're going to have. Most of the things that I focus on are problem based, but they're not problems we have today. The problems are fixable today that are only going to get bigger and more expensive tomorrow.
Welcome to Long-Term Thinking for Business Success, a show for and by business owners. Each episode will explore how to beat the odds and create a sustainable business and the life we've dreamt of. Today's guest is Ben Horstman, the founder of Consolidated Plant Services, the firm he started 8 years ago. Consolidated Plant Services is a pioneering company with NATA accreditation for technical competence in plant risk assessment, project plant inductions or inspections, and introduction to site inspections. Consolidated Plant Services assessment methodology ensures a consistent outcome across all inspection types, regardless of client or site specifications. This capability enables Ben and his team to deliver impartial services in diverse sectors such as mining, construction, oil and gas, local government, and infrastructure. Consolidated Plant Services facilitate a streamlined transition between plant procurement and operations by approving equipment before it arrives. This ultimately mitigates the risk of mobilizing a non-compliant plant and plant failure on site. Hi, Ben. Welcome to the Long-Term Thinking for Business Success podcast, and thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for inviting me and having me on the podcast, Rick.
Ben, before we dive into the background of Consolidated Plant Services, I'd love to understand a bit more about your road to becoming a business owner. My understanding of your journey is it's had a significant number of twists and turns. You started your apprenticeship as a diesel mechanic, then changed careers because of a dirt bike accident. Then you worked in mines in Western Australia and, of all places, Kazakhstan. Eventually, you ended up working in construction in Byron Bay. Can you take us back to the beginning of your career and briefly explain your journey to starting Consolidated Plant Service?
Thanks, Rick. Finished school at 17. I'd had a couple of attempts at getting an apprenticeship as a diesel mechanic. I'd come from a family earth moving repair business, so I had a pretty strong passion for that type of work from a pretty young age and a reasonable understanding of it by the time I finished school. I wasn't a particularly good apprentice, even though I had quite a passion for it. I'm obviously a young bloke and riding dirt bikes and that sort of thing. Ended up getting into a situation where I didn't have enough time to have a major surgery. I remember having to leave the job that I had. I was a tradesman by that stage. I had a fair bit of time, not doing a great amount, which then led me to doing a couple of odd jobs here and there and doing a little bit of traveling around Australia. It led me to meet some pretty interesting people from overseas, which led me to traveling overseas and getting a passion for travel as well. Being a diesel mechanic and traveling weren't really two things that married up particularly well together, and came back to Australia, worked in Western Australia for a couple of years, and a really close friend of mine who's no longer with us got me a job in Kazakhstan, in Kyrgyzstan, in the Genshin Mountains, which married those two passions up. It was at quite high altitude and I got quite sick on and off for the time that I was there, and my body couldn't really handle it. So I ended up coming back to Australia, and I wasn't particularly interested to go back into mining. There was a gentleman who I met when I came back to Australia, and he knew that I had enough of the FIFO life. When I questioned the norm on a lot of things, he facilitated a role for me, learning how to assess equipment on a tunnel project at the back of Byron Bay, in the outer St. Helena Tunnel. Getting into that job married up everything that I'd learned in the past, and also brought out a lot of challenges I'd seen people face with small earth moving and construction companies. That was a challenge to starting CPS. Was always aimed at helping smaller businesses interface into major projects faster and getting them to uphold their reputation while doing it.
That's great. We'll get into more information about Consolidated Plant Services, CPS. But before that, was there ever a desire or opportunity to move into the family business, or was it something that you wanted to do?
That's a very good question. Up until the age of 15, it was definitely something I wanted to do. I worked out at the age of 15. My dad and I can't work together. We still can't work together now, probably while we live in separate states. We get along well. We're just on different paths, look at the world in different ways. I very much support and admire what he's done and will help anywhere I can. We just can't work together. So the family business is a family business, and what I do is what I do.
Do you think that's where your entrepreneurial spirit came from? Was it something from a young age that you wanted to own your own business because you'd seen it in your father or other family members?
The default was the family business, not working for somebody else, not necessarily running a business or being an entrepreneur. That was the normal for us. My dad does what he does, but the rest of our family were farmers, worked on stations, ran horses and trained horses. Nobody had what we now look at as a normal job. The workloads were always incredibly high, but also flexible. And that was the environment I grew up in. And doing an apprenticeship and working for somebody else. I remember the first time I did work experience at the place that I actually did my apprenticeship. I came home. I said to Dad, "These guys get 3 breaks a day. This is unreal. I don't feel like I'm actually working."
That's great. Thank you. I might just dive into consolidated plant services. What's the vision you're trying to see, or what was the problem you identified that you felt you could solve? And who are your ideal customers?
The very specific problem that I set out to solve was to keep experience in an industry that compliance is driving experience out. In my travels, I have met some extremely amazing operators. And when operators, I don't mean operators of equipment, business owners, subject matter expert, people like this. A lot of them have so much red tape on their plate. Some of them get to a point where they go, "This is too hard and I'm going to get out of it." The business was built to try and remove that red tape, manage that red tape so that we can keep the best people in the industry.
In doing that, obviously, it revolves around assessments, but could you just go into that a little bit more detail so people really understand what the business does and the output of the work you do for your clients?
The center point of what we do is assessments. The purpose of the assessments, as opposed to performing mechanical work, is the documentation as to why something is okay or acceptable. It's looking at something with a different set of eyes to look at the reasons why an item of equipment might not be reliable or safe. The simplest way to describe it is we assess equipment to find issues with equipment that are going to cause downtime, rejections from plant going to site, and are going to put people in unsafe situations. Typically, the owners of the businesses can facilitate maintenance, but they can't document it and they can't look at abstract problems that can occur tomorrow that might impact how they work.
And you document that in some sort of assessment and then a report with the recommendations of what they do, or do you help carry on the maintenance or regular updates of material and assets on site?
There's 2 parts of it that we do. The first part is what we call our plant risk assessments. That's a loose term that a lot of people use. We've got quite a bespoke method to how we do what we do, and people compare it to other plant risk assessments, but ultimately it's quite a complex assessment that has a name of a plant risk assessment tool. That forms 50% of our business. The other 50% is actually working for the customers of the people that we're previously working for too, and onboarding equipment as an acceptance inspection to a particular job or project or client. It's a similar task, just how it's documented different. They both have reports. One has a report where the client is requesting us to assess the equipment of one of the subcontractors. The other is the subcontractor engaging us to assess their equipment to make sure that we find any shortfalls before it goes to work for their client.
We'll go through a little bit more how you've developed the business. In some ways, you're creating a new category, or how you've explained it to me. I'm keen to understand the methodologies and the process you've gone to develop your bespoke approach, but we'll come back to that. As business leaders, we often forget to celebrate achievements and wins. We're so focused on the day to day and making sure that our team and our services are as best quality as possible. When you think back over the 8 years of your success at CPS, what are you most proud of and why?
The single biggest thing that I'm the most proud of is the team that we have. When I started, all I wanted to do was work by myself. I didn't want to employ anybody. I didn't want to have anything to do with that. I'd been conditioned to think that people were too hard. I'm not particularly good at managing people. We've got a team that I'd go to war with. I think that's an amazing, I don't know if I was saying it's luck, but I don't think it's too far off of it.
Most of us can't do our work without the team around us. So I understand the pride that a team can create. Just to go a little bit deeper on that, in creating a company that can last decades or generations, the owner's role continually changes, often in line with changes within your team. Can you talk through how you've built your team from the perspective of taking things off your plate or as new requirements for work came on? How have you built your team to support your personal growth and the growth of the business?
As things would come up in the business, there was a lot of tasks that I was like, I can't be in business and do these tasks. I need to hire somebody to do them. That's the basic accounting task I can't handle. There's a lot of other things that I can't handle. All the reasons I got into business was suddenly getting consumed by things that I didn't want to do.
Were these predominantly back office items like bookkeeping, etc., or these front end
Yes.
of it, etc.? Where was
No,
the
they're all back end. Talking to people I like. Any of the front end stuff I quite enjoy. I still enjoy now, just the back end stuff.
who were the people that you brought on first, and when did it get to a point where you couldn't do the work as well as other things and you had to bring on support staff to deliver the work.
The first person I hired was a woman that I worked with, someone that I worked with, and she lasted 3 days and she quit. Then I hired my cousin's wife and she was really helpful. But then my mum wanted to be involved in our business, which was good. She still works with us now. We have our family relationship and we have a work relationship, that's been a challenge, but all in all, what she does is great. I hired someone about 5 years ago and it became pretty obvious pretty quick that their capacity for managing a lot of the things I was particularly good at managing was there. I had to work out pretty quickly how to create the environment for that person to do what they needed to do. And that forced me to do a lot of growing up to not make everything about me. He's now our general manager. The way that he works is unbelievable. Looking back on it, if I was to start everything again, there's probably two people that I would hire straight off the bat. I'd hire an executive assistant, an operations type person to handle day to day. As an entrepreneurial person, you'd see opportunities and you can create a method behind it, but your ability to manage that consistently every day is not a trait that you have.
We would use the language that you're more of a visionary in the business in terms of you can identify opportunities or see solutions to problems, but then you need an execution based person to help you with the delivery. Is that a fair summary?
That's a really good way of putting it.
So that person who's now your general manager, I assume when he came on, it wasn't just a back of office role. He was now helping you with the delivery of the services of the business. Is that correct?
What It was actually pretty funny because when we hired him, he was so many levels above what we hired him to do. At the time, he had applied to go to Antarctica. He said to me about a month after he started, he said, I'm just giving you a heads up. I've applied for this job to go to Antarctica. I'm not sure if I'll take it. I don't know exactly what I said, but I'm fairly certain I said something to the effect of, if you get it, I will fire you so that you have to go and just hope that you'll come back. You can't let opportunities like that come up. Long and the short is he didn't get the job, which worked out pretty well for us. And I think it's worked out pretty well for him, but it would have been a great opportunity for him nonetheless.
Sure. But at least you know what to give him for his 10-year anniversary with you. You can send him on a holiday to Antarctica.
That's probably not a bad idea.
You've talked about how your role has changed from doing everything in the business, which is the standard operating procedure. Interestingly, you went back office before you went service delivery focused. But either way, I'm sure your role changed continually and probably still does change as the business grew. Given that today, what are your top priorities and how do you remain focused on them every day?
I try and look about 12 months ahead. I look at the problems that we're going to have. Most of the things that I focus on are problem based, but they're not problems we have today. The problems are fixable today that are only going to get bigger and more expensive tomorrow. At the moment, a lot of it revolves around developing systems for consistency and efficiency, and also having a feedback loop about what's happening on the ground so that we can measure our productivity, so that we can get into a position where we can become more scalable. We need to be more scalable to go to the next level, given that there's not really anybody that does what we do. There's not systems out there that exist in the way that we need them to exist. That's where a lot of my time goes. And quite a fair amount of time actually is just spent thinking and journaling and writing and trying to get an understanding of things that I probably don't have a great understanding of. Not technical aspect of things, but business focused things around where we're going, why we're going there, is the objective being ego or financial or vision focused. That's probably a question to ask every day. Every time something comes up, it's why do we actually want to do this? Is it to just try and make a quick dollar, which is for me always a terrible idea? Or is it as part of my ego, which again, I try and weed that out? Or is it for the vision of the business? And that's not something that takes 2 seconds to filter out each day.
Well, it's not, and I'm impressed with your self-awareness to do that. Can I just go a little bit deeper on that? I'd love to understand, is there a process or methodology or timing when you do the thinking and journaling? I know on a personal level and lots of business, the hardest thing we do is to find time to actually stop and think. Do you force yourself to do it at a certain time every day? What's your methodology to make sure you take a moment to stop and think?
It integrates into my daily to-do list. We have systems and manages our time and whatnot. I keep my daily to-do list just on a OneNote book that naturally builds out throughout the day. That sort of starts at 6 o'clock in the morning and sometimes could finish at 8 or 9 o'clock at night. I have these spikes of time when I've just eaten or I've just exercised or gone for a walk or whatever, where things come in and I get snippets of clarity. That's when the journaling happens. And if I'm driving, it becomes voice memos.
I'm quite jealous. I try to do a bit of journaling every day, but don't often succeed. because of your comment earlier around trying to foresee problems in the future. Despite all our careful planning we do for our businesses, unexpected things always seem to happen. When you think back to the 8 years of building CPS, I'd like to know if something caught you by surprise. And if it did, how did you adjust your business strategy to achieve success?
I hired someone about 5 years ago again, and on paper it was great. And this person was brought on as a business development manager in my trying to be ultra structured method of doing things. I built out basically a project that I wanted to facilitate with this person. And we had weekly targets, as you do. After 2.5 months, this person hadn't achieved a single target. I didn't really know how to handle the situation. I listened to a lot of people, and it all came back to what I knew needed to be done. One of the biggest things that lets people down in business is they know what needs to be done. You have these days, weeks, years, whatever, when something catches you off guard, your gut tells you exactly what you need to do, and you need to put your big boy or big girl pants on to step up to it. Failure to do that is what sets the limit of the business. They caught me off guard, and I went around in circles asking for people's opinions and whatnot. Eventually I had to get rid of it, and it got nasty. Us and me personally level up quite a bit from having to do that, and understanding that people project a lot of their own stuff onto you. And if you're the wrong type of person, which I probably am, I take accountability for a lot of other people's stuff.
How long between realizing you probably have to let go of the employee and actually ripping the band-aid off did it take?
Took about 2 weeks. And it was about 2 weeks too long. I knew what I needed to do. Now I'm much better at making those decisions. The other part to that is as well is avoiding those situations from occurring in the first place. Become better at spotting those a mile out, taking the rose-colored glasses off and avoiding situations. A lot of those situations that have come about over the years have been a result of ego-based decisions, not vision-based decisions. Stick to the vision. Even if you're a small business at the time, I had a couple of people like always stick to the vision, define the vision, stick to the vision, make the decision based off the vision. Don't go, here's a great operator, we'll find him a job.
My biggest problem, and it's a common problem I hear, especially in engineering and construction related businesses, is it's so hard to find people. Sometimes you have a choice of two people, but neither of them are ideal. I've made mistakes so many times ago. We've got to have somebody in the seat and somebody's better than nobody, but actually in the fullness of
No,
time, it's a bad mistake.
absolutely. We've also been through an interesting period in the last couple of years with COVID and the demands of people. Quite hard to manage in any industry.
It is, especially I think in small business when we often don't have the luxury of the pool of budget to attract the top talent, or sometimes we just don't have the type of work that the top talent want to work on. We're sometimes stuck between rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
Just to go again broadly, what are three things that you think have contributed to CPS's 8 years of sustained success?
Said it before, I'll say it again, consistently coming back to the vision. Every business, no matter what you have, has always got scope creep. There's always these shiny objects that you can go for. You need to think long and hard about them before you do them. The consistency and the discipline about trying to remain on that track has been one. Been pretty lucky to meet some really good people along the way. Obviously, we've got some extremely good people in our team. We've also developed some really good relationships with some extremely high-performing people. But what else would there be? Three things.
You mentioned one earlier that I can give it to you if you like, the team.
Yeah, the team, absolutely.
Just to go into your second one there in terms of building relationships, going all the way back in your career, that you've been picking people up along your way and building long-term relationships with people. Do you think that's a value that you've instilled in your team, either intentionally or unintentionally, to make sure you're identifying movers and shakers and building networks with people?
I think you might be right. I talk about that a lot with our team. Probably a little bit selfish of me. I just like hanging out with people and talking about machinery and drinking beers. That's what I gravitate towards. If I wasn't doing this, I'd probably be doing it for free.
You also mentioned that you're constantly both checking in with yourself on your vision, but it sounds like you're sharing that with your team and potentially with clients as well. If that's the correct assumption, can you just talk through how you continually keep your team aware of the vision and not get caught up in the day-to-day of projects, but you're continually coming back to it with the team? Because inspiring the team through a vision of the business is often one of the most challenging aspects for an owner.
It's something that I need to improve on. I do it far better to our customers than I do to our team. I think it's a result of how we work. There's times when I don't see our team members for weeks at a time. We have a meeting every morning. It's always rushed, and I try and let snippets of things into that. A lot of that's mission related talk, not so much vision related talk. I always try and check in with each person individually too. I listen to what each of our team members talk about and what part of the job that they gravitate towards. If I'm working on something that's related to our vision, then I'll have an offline conversation with them about something that might help make their job easier, or something that they might gravitate towards. It happens on a one-to-one basis.
I mentioned earlier that you're creating a new category, or at least redefining what the industry understands as plant inspection. I'd love to understand how you approach creating the services that you offer. And I expect in working out how to do this, you had your fair share of challenges and failures. So how did that process of learning and testing and developing what sounds like they're now pretty robust and repeatable services for your clients?
When we first started, the first service we tried to offer, and this one took months and really took a year to get off the ground, was the service was aimed at small contracting companies. A small contracting company, they'd go to work for a construction project, spend all this money sending their gear hundreds or thousands of kilometers to a particular job. The job would assess the equipment. They'd say there's 20 things wrong with it. Then that company has to then organize fitters, mechanics, repair people to repair that equipment in a place they haven't worked before, with people they haven't worked with, under rules that they can't really control. It gets very expensive very quickly, and it really affects small business. We had this idea we would actually do a pre-assessment before it went to a site, so that we could pick up those issues before that it left. We could obviously try and save them a lot of money. No one wanted to have anything to do with it. No one cared for it at all. Everybody just wanted to, what we call, run the gauntlet, send it there, try it on, unbend the rules, try and change the opinion of the person who was assessing it. It just wasn't a particularly good way of doing it. We didn't really understand, why don't people want to pick up on this? Then we basically changed the name of the service. And that was something that people were already doing, and they were already paying for it. And they started to get us to do it. They were getting more value out of it comparatively to what they were historically doing. In the early days, it started pretty simply. He just started finding out things that were wrong with the equipment. And over time, we look at thousands and thousands of bits of equipment. We've looked at maybe around 30,000 items of equipment, and we see patterns where patterns don't exist. There's things that should happen that don't happen, that people believe happen. You've got a chain of responsibility, not in the NHVR sense, but a chain of responsibility from who designs a machine to who operates a machine. Everybody's got a accountability within that trail, and a lot of people don't do it. And there's actually no fail safe to ensure that's happening until it goes wrong. When it goes wrong, obviously WorkSafe get involved in it. We keep finding these issues where there'd be shortfalls, and that would trigger us to make a system or provide context or training or whatnot around it. It was a process of continuous improvement where these services come about. And then every now and then you'd have a customer say, can you guys do this service? Would be, yep, we can do that. We'll build a methodology around it and build it into our product, a services line.
That, I expect, took commitment, because you're testing and learning and iterating as you go. Unless you've had a fantastic career and had no failures, which I doubt, there's a certain level of thick skin and resilience you need to manage that sort of process. On a personal level, when you're going through this iterative process, and I imagine you're still doing it today, how do you keep yourself up and going, given failure is exhausting?
6 or 7 years ago, it's particularly bad. Now what's happened is the people that are accountable for this equipment are not the ones that are responsible for it. The people that are responsible for it, that are not accountable for it, are the ones that cause you the most grief. Now, the people that were those have progressed in their careers, and now they're in a position of greater authority where they're accountable and they actually see the consequences of their actions, or the people that are working for their actions. Because we have those relationships now, when something's not right, something's not right. We don't get too much backlash now. Most of the time you get backlash is when people don't understand. You need to work very hard at understanding what stake have they got in the game, how is this affecting that, and how is it affecting it on both sides. This is causing them a $500 delay today. It's not causing them a $5,000 delay in 6 months' time, and they're not aware of that. How do you go about articulating that?
Again, it's testament to your attitude of building long-term relationships with people that you started who are now in middle or senior management. They believe what you believe and are your supporters in industry. Just to go a completely different direction, you mentioned that one of your earlier employees was a new business person. I am interested to understand how you manage sales within the organization, because often one of the most challenging parts of managing an SME is the sales. It's the leaders or owners network or referrals that drive the business. How do you approach business development? And if you are involved in it, how do you manage the balancing act between winning and doing the work?
We do things quite differently to other people. The fundamentals of of sales and having a funnel and leads. We've worked out our own little way of doing that. A lot of it's relationship based. People need to touch, feel, and smell what we do first. Every time somebody's exposed to the service that we do, that's a lead generation. It just comes back to the relationships and having people seeing what you do, the product that you do. We work pretty hard on not just what we do, but how we do it. They've proven to have a level of stickiness to it.
On a day-to-day basis, is it really then your team that's in the field that is managing those relationships for the next project, or is that part of your responsibility to liaise with clients and be sniffing out future opportunities and projects?
It's everybody's. I do different levels to other people. The exposure that people have to clients, the way that they are, we call it professionalism, goes beyond that. It's business development. It's how you dress. It's how you talk. It's how you answer the phone. It's how you deliver the product. It's the questions that you ask. It's the rapport that you built with the people that's there. That's what they remember. They don't remember what the task is that you actually did most of the time until 3 months down the track when it actually pays dividends for them.
Do you find that your growth is coming from additional projects with current clients, or as you mentioned earlier, that once you're on a site, the new business comes from an introduction through your current clients, or have you got to focus on winning new work and building relationships with other industries, or just making sure your current clients are really happy and continuing to give you more work?
The focus is on finding industries that are going to have a more stable workload than construction. A lot of what we do is construction. And as we know, that's going to have an end to at some point. We're trying to understand value that we provide and where that can fit into more stable industries like local government, utilities, renewables, oil and gas.
How are you going about getting into those industries? Do you know people that are getting you a first introduction? Are you calling people to explore how they manage these sorts of issues? What's the approach to cracking a new industry for you?
It's just time. And going back to what you said before, like picking up a lot of networks along the way, everywhere I seem to go in my personal life, I come across people that fit into these molds. I don't ever try and upsell anything to any of these people, but I do like to talk about what I do. I like to listen to people's stories. Once you do that, they seem to get interested in you. And then once they find out that we have a bit of a unique way of doing things that is pre-coupled.
We think about these sorts of things as small businesses. We don't need heaps of clients. If we can consistently generate one or two new clients or new opportunities, we can hit our targets. We think we talk to fewer people that are the right people, and you'll be far more impactful.
Absolutely. And that's quite an interesting point. We've broken up, off-hired, whatever you want to call it, a couple of customers over the last 18 months. And it's that they don't fit our values. As simple as that. They were over some fairly small things. People said, "Oh, we want you to leave some of this detail out of these reports." We said, "No, this reputation hinges on transparency and the impartiality of this information. We're not bending them for one customer."
I think we attract people that agree with what we agree with and believe what we believe. And when those values are pushed, as the example of a client asking to leave stuff out of the documentation that puts your reputation at stake, will only encourage somebody who wants your reputation because they want your stamp of approval to come closer to you. Earlier, you mentioned one of your focuses is on building systems and processes. One of the areas that I am continually exploring in businesses is what system and processes they use, because fundamentally, when you look at what makes a company succeed over time, it's the fact that they've embedded a way to work, a system or a process or a structure into their company that enables people to do their best work without having to focus on what's the next step. It's about how do I do that step the best, not what is the next step. In that context, could you tell us about a system or process that has significantly impacted your success and what impact it created?
I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here. I've got some fairly strong views on systems and processes in business. We sit in a pretty unique situation where we get to see the inner workings of hundreds of businesses, and we see what works well and we see what doesn't work very well. We see culture, we see a lot of different things. Most businesses don't run very well, but they price things right, and through whatever reason, they seem to make it work. Most businesses think that implementing a system and typically an off-the-shelf system will fix all their problems, and they don't. All they seem to do is automate the problems and enable the business to be able to make those problems a lot faster and a lot cheaper. There's quite a number of systems that we use and they work pretty well. A lot of we develop ourselves. Understanding what actually needs to happen before you even start with that is the most important thing to do. What's the information you've got? How does it need to be reviewed? How does it need to be analyzed? When does it need to get where? Then from there, once you understand how the flow of the information needs to work, then you can find anything off the shelf to do it. And the lucky thing is you've got thousands of different systems that you can mold to fit what you need to mold. If you've got developed the fundamental architecture, then it's not that big of an issue to create them. The other part to it as well is that everything plugs into each other now, making sure that you understand how information from point A needs to get to point B or point Z, and not rely on systems that tell you that they know where it needs to go, but actually gets lost along the way.
We talk a lot about what systems and processes we use, and I'm always a believer. It's never the tool that creates the success. It's how we use the tool that creates success.
Absolutely.
Is there a methodology or a system? When I say system, I don't necessarily mean the platform per se. I really do mean the thinking behind the way you've documented how something works in the business that has had a remarkable success for you.
We implemented one about 4.5 years ago, I think, maybe 4 years ago. Tristan, who's our GM, he made a suggestion about it. I didn't look into it properly at the time. I said, oh, no, I think that'll work. Anyway, eventually we used it, and it was a big mistake of me to not take that on board. We're spending 2 days a week just doing invoicing. I was like, this is ridiculous. He suggested using this particular tool, which is not for what we do at all. After the second week, I sat in the office at about 10 o'clock on Monday morning, and I was like, I don't know what to do. I've just got nearly 2 whole days of my week back, and I was completely lost. The other parts of it as well is with the NATA accreditation, we had to write procedures for everything. And I went through a period, 8 weeks, working from 3 to about 6 or 7 on procedures. So I had a clear time to write these procedures, and we've got dozens and dozens of them. We've got our accreditation, but nobody reads. Now we're going through and turning them into videos and tests and assessments on them so that they can bring people up to speed better.
I often find that the act of you or other members of your team just thinking through the process, the value within the thinking, even though it's not necessarily used thoroughly in the future, the fact that you've gone through, you've thought about it, and you've trained your core team is where the initial value comes from.
It is interesting that because you go, particularly when you're trying to do a video, writing a normal procedure is not as bad, but when you're trying to explain something on a video, you have multiple takes on it, and you'll realize that you actually understand the topic quite well, but you don't understand the specific outputs of that topic. When you're trying to explain something, you'll go around in circles and it actually doesn't mean anything. So you need to really start it, define what you're trying to get out of it, come back to it again.
We've touched on some of this already, but I'm interested if there's another example. For me, the hardest lesson to learn is one that I've had to revisit a few times. That conversation of challenging employees that are not right is something that I've had to relearn a few times. Is there a lesson that you've had to learn and possibly relearn, and how has that impacted the business?
Being the naive optimist when it comes to people, that's a mistake that I've made multiple times. I like to see the best in people. I always form a positive bias when I meet people. I rationalize people's poor decision making. I respect people the most that have the greatest amount of discipline more than anything else. But on the other hand, I also rationalize people's poor decision making too. It's a bit of a double-edged sword. And when you're bringing them on and you go, okay, that makes sense. I'm not in a position to judge on that decision making, yet the patterns always play out again. And I think we're getting better at it too. Our GME's particularly good at balancing me out on that and bringing naive optimism down to a level that's a bit more rational. If I was left to my own devices, I'd be in all sorts of strife.
It's great to have somebody next to us who can see the world from a different perspective to make sure we've got a balanced view. A great strategy is focused on really the most impactful activities. And it sounds like you've worked very hard at developing your strategic approach to your business. In our experience, a company can really only effectively work on a finite number of internal priorities, typically 3 or 4. Can you talk about 1 or 2 of your current strategic initiatives and the decision process you use to decide what these priorities are?
These things change on nearly a day-by-day basis. In a small business, they change on a day-by-day basis because you don't always have the finances to support them, or you don't have the people power to continue down a path when the labor's needed somewhere else. But one of them is setting up a branch in Queensland, which has got a few reasons behind it. That's a very complex thing to do as a small business, very complex thing to do when you have quite complex methods in what you do. And how to handle that is a continual evolution.
Why Brisbane or why another office? Do you feel like you've tapped out the opportunities in Victoria, or is it new markets that are up there that aren't in Victoria? What's driving the decision to move interstate?
New markets that are up there, there's a lot more renewables that are being built there. and renewables have maintenance that are required. The maintenance of renewables takes equipment, and we look at the amount of touch points that we could potentially have in those areas. While we don't necessarily do any of that exactly the maintenance aspect of it now, it's going to exist, and our methodology plugs straight into it. Just be a matter of time until we meet the right people. So there needs to be a presence.
Just as my final question, Bill Gates famously said we overestimate what we could get done in 1 year, but underestimate what we can get done in 10 years. Where do you see consolidated plant services in the next 5 to 10 years? And in somewhat more importantly, what do you think the key obstacles you think you must overcome to get there?
Long-term goals of the business comes tied up with my personal goals a little bit. Going back a few steps, talking about traveling, I still enjoy traveling. I very much enjoy traveling and spending time with people that I already know to some extent, or know enough to spend time within areas that I haven't been, talking about topics that we have mutual interest in. In 10 years, having CPS working globally, and in 5 years, having it working in at least 5 out of 7 states of Australia. Not on any particularly large scale, but enough that I've got a reason to be there. I've got a reason to take my family there. I've got a reason to see interesting things. The challenges with it, growing cash flow, profitability, risk of what we do inherently, something bad goes wrong, we've overlooked, or that could impact us pretty badly. Managing relationships, measuring our productivity, all of the above, which is what we just deal with on a day-to-day basis. Prioritizing day-to-day, week to week towards that, with that in the back of your mind. And our team is on board with this a lot. We have a $500 job that fits the 5-year plan, and we have a $2,000 job that doesn't fit it. These guys will always prioritize a $500 job over the $2,000 job, which is a pretty big credit to them. They're the little obstacles that we obviously have, but everybody's on board with it too.
You take quite a long-term view of your business and you'll make changes today that are investment in tomorrow. It sounds, especially on that example you just gave me, that you'll reduce the importance of a profitable job to build a relationship or to step into a new area that will have a long-term pay, long-term result. When you think broadly about your business, even though obviously profitability and productivity drive short term, you're prepared to sometimes sacrifice some of those as a priority for the benefits of tomorrow. Is that a correct interpretation?
100%. We call it taking the sugar highs out of it. You have a lot of one-off jobs that you could chase. If you look at the total customer lifetime value versus the cost to acquire a customer and the cost to maintain that customer, if everybody did that, you'd look at how you did jobs quite differently. We're just looking at it from a scientific perspective as opposed to just trying to make a quick dollar.
It's a theme that's come through the whole of the podcast, that not only do you look at it from that perspective, you also look at it what aligns to your personal values and the values of your team and company.
Yeah.
Ben, as I said, that was my final question. What inspired me throughout this conversation is not only your commitment to who you are and the values that you're trying to build your company with, also your commitment to building long-term relationships with the team and your customers, because you know that's where success is going to come from. So thank you very much for your time today and for allowing us to dig into your story and the success of CPF.
Thanks very much for your time, Rick.